Welcome. It's funny because when we named this and the word geometry came up, it was like, okay, now you're not going to make this too boring, or be sure and give people experiences. And so tonight's going to be a mixture of some intellectual information, some pretty pictures, and if it's okay with you guys, we'll actually get you up and have you feeling perhaps some things. Is that good? Everybody up for that? Great. Let me give you a little background then. As I was mentioned, I am a chiropractor. And I didn't go to make my qualitative statement, I didn't go to chiropractic to fix people. I became a chiropractor because philosophically it's about releasing the expression of the infinite potential within us. And when I read that and when I signed up for chiropractic, I took those words seriously. And my whole life in chiropractic, and as I serve people through that art, it's been about how can we truly deliver that promise? Because there is an infinite potential within us to heal, to grow, to evolve, to express life fully. And there are no limits to that. By definition, if it's infinite, there are no limits to that. And so each day as I serve, it's a question of how can we truly deliver that, and what does it mean? And so tonight I'm going to give just little snippets. I'm not going to go into the whole quantum theory of biogeometric integration because I want to get to the geometry. But to frame it, I think it serves just to give a little bit. And so when we look at the world that we live in, essentially, everything is vibration and tone. And we know that. And the thing is that if it's vibration and tone, if I truly am made up of energy, then it would seem to me that I ought to be able to change everything about me in a moment. If I truly get and connect with the fact that I'm energy, then I could change my height like that, theoretically. I could walk through that wall, theoretically. I could instantly change my blood chemistry. I could change the expression of my physiology. Anything would be possible. And so the question is, if that's true, why can't I? I mean, I could take a run at that wall, but I'm having a feeling that I'd probably bounce back here as opposed to going straight through it, even though scientifically I know it's possible. And what I've come to realize is that the reasons why we can't has nothing to do with our physiology and how we're put together. Einstein said there's no limits of matter, only limits in our ability to see the possibility. And what that says then is that the limits that we experience with our bodies, my inability to walk through that wall, my inability to be taller or change my hair back to its original brown color, all of that is not a limit in how I'm put together or in what makes up me physically. It's a limit in my consciousness, my ability to truly believe and know it's possible. Well, that being the case, then how can we shift that? Because it strikes me that it's more than a mind phenomena. It has to go to our very, very core, because intellectually, I know the physics. I know the mechanism that happens for us to walk through that wall. But intellectually knowing it is entirely different than truly experiencing that and embodying it. One of the things that I often hear people say is that this body is simply a vessel that my true being walks around in. And you know what? I don't buy it. This body is part of the expression of my spirit, of my infinite consciousness. And to tell you straight up, I said at a seminar a little while ago, I've decided not to leave the planet until I can take this with me. I want to truly be able to simply, not necessarily die to go on to another plane of existence. Do you guys mind if we go out there tonight?
Yeah.
Okay, we can. Okay, so if you haven't realized that I'm just kind of weird, then here we go. Here's the thing. I want to be able to have a physiology that so embodies the infinite potential that I am. And I want to live in a body that so gets that energy is not something that flows through me, but is me. That when I choose to transition, I simply dissolve and go somewhere else. And then if I want to dip back in here, I just drop back in. Because, now remember, we live in a world where the potential is infinite. So we might as well set our goals pretty big. Again, the question is, how do we get there? When I was faced with really delivering that promise of chiropractic to release the interference to the infinite potential, I tell you what, it was pretty big and a little bit overwhelming, because most people coming to you, it's like, will you fix this? Will you fix this? My back hurts, my this, my that. And it's realizing that wherever we are right here, right now, is a perfect expression of the music that we are. If we change our vibration, we change our physiology. And I knew to the core of my being, it wasn't about trying to fix something physically. It was truly about getting to the cause and releasing that energy that was holding us there. The way that I view things right now, and it's just a real quick view of the theory behind what we do, is that everything is vibration and tone. That's what quantum theory tells us. Right? Our system is constantly processing that vibration and tone, whether it's from a physical, chemical, emotional, mental input. And what happens in our physiology is that as we have an experience, essentially our field goes into a heightened state of chaos to process that information. And when that heightened state of chaos, what it reads is, okay, is there anything new for me to experience here? Because what they say is that we live in a holographic universe. The infinite information that exists actually exists in every single atom. Every atom has within it the information that exists. A little microcosm of that is our bodies. In our cells, stored in the DNA, is all the information necessary to make you all over again. That's where cloning comes from. And so every cell of your body has the ability to produce every chemical, to be every type of tissue. And so that being the case, then you have to ask yourself, okay, if every cell has the information necessary to be all these other things, then what is it that determines the difference between a heart cell or a liver cell or a kidney cell? Well, it's not the information it possesses, it's that which it expresses. And so the information for the qualities and characteristics of a heart are activated in those cells, and so it expresses those qualities and characteristics. Different information for liver, different information for kidney, so on and so forth. Well, then if we take that into the bigger world here, all of the atoms of this lovely podium and all the atoms of me have the infinite information that exists in the universe. So then what differentiates me from that podium is that, and I'm hoping that we can agree in this, more of that information's been activated in me than in the podium. And this is where I'd like for you to agree. And so I express a little more complex qualities and characteristics than that podium. Are we good with that?
Yep.
Okay, good. I mean, people have said, Sue, you're dumber than a rock, but hey, I beg to differ. So what happens then? We have these experiences. So the question then is, what activates that information? Well, guess what? It's the experiences we have in life. And so I have an experience. That experience carries information. That information is essentially expressed through vibration and tone. My field, the energy that is me, when I have that experience, essentially goes into a state where it's reading the vibration, the frequency and tone of that. And when it reads it, it says, okay, essentially there's three possibilities. Either it's expressing information, expressing a frequency that is already part of my musical matrix. It's something that I already know. It's something that I already express. And at that point, I have the experience. It says, yep, been there, done that. When I come out of the experience, I completely relax out of whatever it was. But no changes happened, really, because been there, done that. I already know it. The other possibility is that I have an experience, it's a brand new experience, meaning it has a frequency, it's expressing a frequency that is not part of my musical matrix. Then what happens is that as that frequency starts to play through my system, right, what it does is it activates the previously dormant piece of information that matches that frequency. Kind of like if you have two guitars sitting side by side, if you pluck the A string on one guitar, guess what happens to the A string on the other guitar? it also plays. It's the same kind of thing. When that new frequency comes in, it essentially plucks that little guitar string. Then my cells, my atoms start to express that music. And so now this frequency, instead of just kind of playing in my field, actually is resonating from my being, increasing the complexity of my music. I'm a perfect expression of the music that I am. If you increase the complexity of my music, guess what I've just done? I've taken a little step along the path of evolution. And this is how we learn, grow, and evolve. This is how, over centuries, living systems have evolved to the state where we are right now. If we can understand that vibration, if we can understand that music, then we can start to get a glimpse of truly that information in the infinite. Because perfect case scenario, we integrate that experience, we learn, we take the step in evolution. Afterwards, we completely relax out of it. We're refreshed, we're new. I've learned, I've moved on. But you know what? I don't know about you, but I'm having a lot of experiences lately that I am not integrating. Things are coming fast, right? I mean, we get inundated with so much input now. What happens if we don't integrate it? What happens if I can't process that new frequency, that experience? Well, then it ends up stored in our body. Essentially, when that experience comes in, our field goes into this heightened state of chaos. Well, if we process it and integrate it afterwards, it goes back to a resting level of chaos, but at a greater level of complexity. Well, if we don't fully integrate it, then guess what? We end up in that heightened state of chaos. And that does several things. It alters how our emotions, it alters our thoughts, it alters how our physiology expresses, and ultimately it alters how our body structures itself and how it positions itself. All is an expression of that music. For me as a chiropractor, I'm thinking, okay, if I'm about releasing the interference to the infinite potential, then it seems like I ought to be more concerned about that energy stored in the system than whether this bone is moved this way or the pain is here, this or that. Does that make sense? You hanging with me so far? Mm-hmm. The thing is that how do you tap into that energy? Because I tell you what, it's everywhere. I mean, narrow it down for me. You know, if I'm going to access the system to release that, how do I know? Well, they say, if you would understand the invisible, look fully to the visible. For me, this whole trip into sacred geometry, the whole trip into understanding truly life, evolution on a bigger scale, came from simply trying to understand what was happening on the table for people. My trip into sacred geometry did not come initially through an educational process. It came through an experience on the table. Simply trying to understand how and why people distort the way they do, when it releases, why they were having the experience. While I was in chiropractic school, I didn't at the time, but now I look at it as really a gift. I had no money. And so I'm working like 3 jobs just to get through chiropractic school, one of which I did massage at night. And one of the things that caused me to look at and trained me to look at was simply the question of what's that connected to? So for me, when I was in school and this bone was out of place, it was, okay, yeah, but what's it connected to? And that question of what it's connected to led down this path of understanding the body in an entirely different way. When I talk about the geometry and biogeometric integration, it may have started out as what they call a secular approach, which is a very quantitative thing. It's like this rotates here, and it's this many degrees rotated, and so we'd like that to rotate back. A quantitative approach is handy. We can calculate how much we have to pay in taxes. We can calculate how much change we get back. We can calculate how many tablespoons for how many cups of this. The thing is that it'll only take us so far, though. What I began to realize as I noticed the geometry and the connections in the body is that there was something much more than just the angles that it shifted. But that was how it was connected. When it moved from a secular approach into what they call a symbolic or a philosophical approach, you start to use geometry to see patterns and connections, to see how things work together. And in seeing the patterns and the connections and how things work together, what they say is that you can start to get a map of the divine. Originally, when mathematics and science were created, it wasn't about proving this or proving that. It was about trying to understand the world that we live in. And they felt if you could understand the principles of nature, the principles of design, then you could get a little glimpse into the mind of that infinite, however you define that. But in order to do that, you need to see the patterns. You need to see how things are connected. Seeing how they're connected gives you a map of understanding, a much deeper wisdom that's there. Part of what we're going to show you is that tonight. That wisdom of how we're designed, give you an experience of that. When you talk about sacred geometry, though, guess what? It not only gives you a map of the divine, it actually helps you along the path of actually experiencing and connecting on a deeper and deeper level to that divine. And truly, I feel that chiropractic is a sacred practice because it's about connecting you with your infinite potential. Because check this out, if that experience is stored in your system, right, that opportunity for you to learn, grow, and evolve is stored here. And I tell you what, it's creating some havoc. It disrupts your electromagnetic field, which is responsible for so much stuff. Do you know that your mind does not exist in your brain, but in a field around you? Do you know that whenever there's a change in your environment, your field not only reads what that information is, adapts and changes your physiology, but also processes the information and learns from it before your nerve system, before any of your senses have even recognized that anything happened? You can take a perfectly beating heart, put it in an incoherent field, and cause it to go into a dysrhythmia. You take that dysrhythmic heart, put it in a synchronistic, coherent field, goes into a perfect rhythm. Well, that experience that you have that's stored and not expressed wreaks havoc. It creates incoherence in your field. It also disrupts your neurochemistry, which is responsible for your emotions, your memories, your behaviors, and also distorts the geometry of your body, causing there to be tension on the organs, on the cells, on the nerve system, so that it's simply hard for the body to function optimally. Well, when all that's distorted, guess what? It's easy to happen. Get distracted by how bad it feels. And then it's just like, will you just fix this? Will you just stop this from happening? Because it's really uncomfortable. The thing is, though, is that if that's the only thing you see, if the only thing you see is the dis-ease and the discomfort that it creates, I just wonder if we're missing the opportunity and the possibility in it. If we seek to simply be comfortable in life, does that enhance our path to wherever it is that we want to go? And for some people, maybe it does. It's like, you know what? I really just need to be comfortable for a while. I just need to have it not be overwhelming for a while. It's great. I wonder if it's enough, though, long term. And that's for each of us to decide. Because here's the possibility in it. All that dis-ease that's being created is simply an expression of a potential that's within you to be more. Everybody, for just a minute, think about something that is your favorite thing in the world to do. Have you got one? Okay, for me, please don't judge. Karaoke. I love it. Love, love, love. There's a furrowed brow there. She's like, seriously? Here's the thing, though. I karaoke in the privacy of my own home. And in my office. I don't go to bars. I don't know if I'd like that. I love to sing. I was raised in a musical family. I love it, okay? So think about that thing that you just love to do. And now here's the deal. You can never do that again. Ever. Anybody else whose chest just tightened up a little bit? You have this amazing potential within you to express something of passion, of joy. Now you can't. That's what that information is in here. It's a potential for you to be more, to express more of that infinite within you. And something in the moment said, nope, I can't. It creates dis-ease. The good news about all you got going on is that guess what? It's a potential within you. Sometimes the people with the nastiest stuff, I got a 5-page history people fill out, and there are some people that like bring in a folder of 10, 20 more pages of all the stuff they got going on, right? And I gotta tell you, and maybe you think, if the karaoke didn't cue you into the sick mind, then here you go. Part of me, it's like my mouth waters a little bit because it's like, oh my gosh, that's so much potential within there. There's so much potential to release when there's all that going on. And I tell you what, the louder your body's screaming, the louder it's saying, set me free. Set me free. And so this is the model that we work with. The question now is then, if I'm going to release this potential that was of an intensity that at the moment you had it, you could not process it. If I'm going to release that again into your system, it seems to me at least prudent, if not loving and honoring and respectful, to release it in a way that has the greatest possibility and probability that this time, when it starts playing through there, you're in a place where you can release it. Does that make sense? Because I tell you what, anybody ever been pushed beyond what really served them? It doesn't serve. There's such a mess to clean up. And sometimes it locks it in so much deeper that it's just that much harder to release. They say that timing, perhaps in all things, is the most important thing. And so here we are. I know that with your average person, there's probably millions, billions of old experiences, potential within them that are there just ready to be released. The question is, which one is the perfect one for you right here, right now? And is there a way that we can understand the dynamics of it, how it's going to release, the pattern in the body? If that experience truly distorts, then it seems like I ought to be able to understand that. Well, one of the ways that I understand it, and now we're getting a little bit into geometry, is, everybody cool? Yeah. Hanging in there? Yeah. Okay, good. It's through the concept of tensegrity. The term was coined by R. Buckminster Fuller. It's a contraction of two words, tensional and integrity. And I just like to give people a little glimpse into Buckminster Fuller's mind. And here's how he defines it. Tensegrity describes a structural relationship principle in which structural shape is guaranteed by the finitely closed, comprehensively continuous tensional behaviors of the system and not by the discontinuous and exclusively local compressional member behaviors. Is that clear for everybody? I mean, you think I'm talking, not that it's gibberish, but man, you got to be way smarter than me to dissect that. So let me break it down for you. Geodesic dome. Okay, here's another sick thing about me. One of my desires is to go on that lovely television show Survivor and build a geodesic dome for us all to live on. It's like, you go do this, I gotta build my dome, right? Anyway. Just seeing if you're awake, just lightening up. Thanks for laughing. So this is a tensegrity structure. It's very, very simple building blocks. It's a combination of hard things, rigid struts, and what they call tension-bearing members, stretchy things. And the rigid struts can bear both compression and tension and maintain their integrity. The tension-bearing members can bear tension, but if you put too much compression, they'll collapse. Right? If you look at the individual building blocks, it's stretchy things and hard things. It's really no big deal. However, because of how they're put together, it creates this amazing structure, the qualities and characteristics of which you would never predict based on those two simple things. And here's the principles of it. First off, every tensegrity structure is what they call triangulated. And so triangles have to be there, essentially. This shape can change, but this one can't. The other thing is that if you'll notice, the rigid struts, they don't meet. What connects everything to everything else is the tension-bearing members. Now, in its resting state, it's what they call pre-stress, so it's under tension, right? And so these are under tension even when it's just in a neutral state. And because of that, it actually supports itself. It's independent of gravity and supports itself. Cool? So it doesn't all collapse. The other really cool thing is that if you put any type of energy into it, whether it's a physical force, a vibration, information, what this creates, because of how it's put together, is a huge transmission array, so that any energy or force put in immediately is translated over the entire structure. Do you see that? Essentially what that does is it takes a bunch of individual parts and turns them into a community, where they are in direct communication. It is physically impossible for tensegrity structures to move part of it without distorting the entirety of it. It's physically impossible to put information in part of it and not have everybody who's all the parts get the information. Cool? Why is that important in any way, shape, or form? Just because it's cool. Here's the thing. Guess what we are? We are big old tensegrity structures. Okay? On a macroscopic level, the rigid struts are our bones. The tension-bearing members are muscles, ligaments, tendons, all the connective tissue of the body. Even on a microscopic level, on a cellular level, the rigid struts are microtubules, extracellular matrix, large bundles of microfilaments. The tension-bearing members are individual microfilaments. And so from a big scale to a little scale, this is how we're put together. Now, has anybody, how many people studied biology at all? Yeah. So lung tissue, very, very delicate tissue. I mean, incredibly delicate tissue. You ever wonder how it is that you can take a big breath or sneeze really hard and your lungs aren't ripped to shreds? It's such delicate tissue. If you take a look at the skin cells of your body, you can pull on your skin, you can stretch, and they aren't ripped to shreds, and yet it's very delicate tissue. You ever wonder how that is? Do you ever wonder how it is that sometimes you twist your ankle and then all of a sudden you're feeling it up clear here? It's because everything's connected to everything else. When you feel that tension in your stomach, a lot of times, gosh, I've got a headache from it. Or I can feel it all the way down through gripping my feet. It's because everything's connected to everything else. Just to give you a couple pictures. This is by a guy named Donald Ingberg. He's an MD, and this is his model of a cell. I just think it's kind of fun. The little red thing is a nucleus in the middle. And then here's the tensegrity model. This was created by a guy named T.E. Flemons, and he's actually a structural engineer, and he saw a lot of people in the life sciences start to apply the concepts of tensegrity to living systems. And he simply asked the question, is it true? And guess what? He discovered that it is. Notice all the triangles and all the repeated patterns. So essentially, here's what happens. You have an experience. Has a particular frequency and tone, carries information, right? Your being, your field experiences that. If you integrate it, great, you moved on, take that evolutionary step, good for you. If you don't, then what happens first is that your field goes into chaos, right? Then what happens is that as your field goes into chaos, the structure of your body, the chemistry of your body also starts to express that dissonance. Okay? It'll actually change the function of your chemistry. And also what'll happen is that as a perfect expression of that musical dissonance now, your geometry will start to distort. Right? As it starts to distort, it's stored in a few places. It'll be stored in the tension-bearing members, can also store into the bony structures. But notice, and as it stores in, what'll happen is that your geometry will take on a whole different shape, now as a perfect expression of that energy stored in the system. Does that make sense? Interestingly, let me back up for a second. Think for a second. as brilliant, as logical, as ordered as the body has to be to do all the things it does every moment of every day for you to function. Tens of thousands of chemical reactions in your body every second. The simple thing of taking a step, the muscles that have to contract, the ones that have to relax, the proprioception so that you can balance, let alone the chemistry that shifts just so that energy is produced to do it. It's pretty smart. It is equally as brilliant and logical and ordered at how it stores this stuff. It beautifully takes that experience that was so big that you couldn't process it in that moment, and first off, distributes it throughout the entire system so that no one area gets overwhelmed. Also, it distorts it in a way where first you'll feel it in a particular tissue, then you'll feel it lock further into particular points in the body. Those points are what carries the greatest potential. Right? That distortion that say this is one cell is going to repeat in every single cell of the body, and that same distortion is going to repeat, guess what, in the bigger macroscopic structures of the body too. And so there's going to be this repeated pattern of this distortion in every single cell of your body. Is that cool or what? All is a perfect expression of this dissonance. Am I just crazy weird, or is that just... That's how brilliant the body is, right? It stores it in this way. And so here's the deal. Here's what I'd like for you to do. I want you to, from your... I didn't mean to throw that at you, I'm sorry. Here's what I want you to do. You can sit, you can stand, whatever. But I'd like for you to get a feel for how things are connected. And so first off, just turn shoulders. Keep your pelvis straight and turn from your shoulders. Now notice, do you feel it locking at the base of your ribs? Yeah, feel that tension that's created in your ribs? Yeah. Well, guess what? Geometrically, your shoulders are related to your ribs, right? Now, if you twist your pelvis, but try to look straight ahead, notice if you twist your pelvis, what happens first, you'll feel it at the base of your ribs, right? That wanting to pull it separate, or pull you forward. And then notice if you pull your shoulders, again that way, your head's going to come this way. And so shoulders, base of the rib cage, top of your pelvis, all geometrically related. And if you really turn your shoulders this way and then look straight ahead, you feel it at the base of your skull, also geometrically related. The body is beautifully designed. As we distort and we take an experience in, it's going to distort, and then it's going to repeat that distortion all the way through. Cool? All because of this. Every single cell of your body is playing in the pity party of, oh my gosh, I'm in crisis. Every single cell of your body. And so the question is, how do we map that out? If it's in every single cell of the body, then theoretically, every single cell of the body is game to release that energy stored in the system, because it makes sense to me. If I release this energy, and I want to do it in a way that increases the possibility and probability that this time your system will integrate it, it makes sense to do it in the right time. Yeah. It makes sense to do it in the priority that your body wants. And it makes sense to go where the potential is the greatest. Don't you think? Because if the potential is the greatest over here, and I go over there, say that I would like Lydia to go get me a glass of water. Mm-hmm. And so I come over here and I say, hey, Lydia, will you get me a glass of water? And Donna goes, I think she knows my name. And she's so obsessed right now with the fact that I called her Lydia, that guess who's not getting a glass of water? She could say, who's Lydia? And again. And she could be going, now does Sue want a glass of water regardless of whether Lydia gets it? Or is it really important to her that Lydia actually gets it for her? Either way, I'm not getting any water. Or if I get some, I'm probably going to get it way late. and then it'll be stagnant, and who wants to drink that? Or she passes it down the line. Oh, that's Lydia over there. So she passes it down the line and passes it down the line, and by the time Vicky gets the message to Lydia, Vicky says something like, Lydia, Sue has water in her basement. And so she'd like for you to get that water out of there. It gets over there, but it's totally distorted. All because I went where the potential wasn't. Does that make sense? Yeah. If I go in your system to release it where the potential is not there, then I'm going to be doing a lot of work for nothing. And you're not going to be able to take that evolutionary step. And so for me, in this path of understanding how the body communicates, one of the first things I had to know is that first off, it's everywhere. But also the next thing I needed to understand is that, wow, when that energy goes in, as I bend my body, I can feel tension build up in certain places. As I distort, I can feel that tension, that energy lock in particular places. What would happen if I could understand that? Because if I can understand that, then I get a picture of the energy that's underlying it. And here's how. Are you guys doing okay? You hanging in there okay? Okay, nobody's nodded off yet, so that's good. Real quickly, we're just going to go into fractals, because this will be important later. An artistic definition of it, and we're not going to go heavy-heady into them, so don't worry. It's a harmony in which everything is understood to affect everything else. In mathematical fractals and also natural fractals, holism appears as self-similarity, evidence of a holistic feedback process. Essentially, fractal geometry is the geometry and the math of above, down, inside, out. It's the math of holism, of everything existing in the infinite existing in the smallest thing. Right? There are a few qualities and characteristics of fractal structures. One is that you get repeated patterns on different scales. That's the self-similarity. And so in a fractal world, scale doesn't matter. What you see macroscopically is just a bigger picture of what you see microscopically. In the body, in the Tensegrity structures, there's big triangles and little triangles all the way through. There's hard things and stretchy things, just repeated patterns of it all the way through again and again and again. Right? In a fractal world, what those repeated patterns create is what they call an iterative process, which is essentially a magnification process. And so mathematically, an iterative process is if you take two numbers and add them together, and you take the sum and add it back in, and the sum of that and add it back in. You keep doing that a few times, you're going to end up with a huge number on the other end. Well, that's how the body happens. Very simple things, simple input into the system, because of our fractal nature, can actually become magnified as it goes through. And that's that whole idea that very complex things can arise from very simple causes. You know, if you think about it, just some examples. One moment of passion, and you could have a whole brand new human being. That's a very simple thing, creating something pretty complex at the end, right? One incident can completely change the direction of a nation. And I tell you what, when you're in the healing arts, one touch, one word can change the person's life if it's artfully applied in the right time. Right? This is the nature of us. The simplest thing can cause huge things to happen. The most famous of the Mandelbrot's, or of the fractals, is the Mandelbrot set. And that is the basic design, and we won't talk about the mathematics of it, but there it is. And so let me take you on a little trip into the Mandelbrot. And what you're going to look for is that design. And you'll see that design just repeats again and again and again. Scale doesn't matter. You're getting very sleepy. Sue is a brilliant speaker. So essentially, that's taking you into the nature of how we're designed. We're repeated patterns on different scales. What quantum physics tells us is that if you take matter and you break it down and break it down and break it down and break it down and break it down, ultimately you get to a place where it's all vibration, it's all energy. Well, that's what you saw happen in that. We started getting deeper and deeper to that fractal, finer levels of magnification over and over and over again, that same pattern, repeating, finer and finer geometry. And then at the core, at the end of it, that energy spirals out. If you would understand the invisible, look fully to the visible. If you want to understand the energy that we are, then understand the fractal nature that we are. If I can understand the geometry on the surface, then guess what? That just gives me a bigger picture of that finer and finer and finer geometry all the way through. Because I tell you, straight up, especially when I started in practice, I was wet behind the ears. I was green. I could ask the question, what's this one thing connected to? And that's about all I could handle. But I wanted to get to a place where I truly experienced the body holographically. And if you're going to do that, if I experience the body holographically, then guess what, if I may? Every single cell of her body has within it the infinite information of the universe. Every single cell of her body has within it the infinite information, every experience she's had, every bit of growth that's happened, every experience that is yet to express its potential and integrate. Knowing that, and the fact that everything is connected to everything else, then from one place, I ought to be able to connect and know the infinity of her. Feel from that place every part of her. Tap into all of it and release it in that one thing. I've now told you that it's possible. Now that I've told you, we can all do it, right? Knowing it and experiencing it and embodying it are two different things. But what if we could take little baby steps? If I can understand the geometry out here and how this connects to this and then connects to this, then maybe that takes me closer to how it connects to this, finer levels, all the way down that fractal, continuing, how it all connects until we get right to that gap between where energy and matter are in flux. Because it's in the gap in between the potentiality is. You access there, and all is possible. Here's a little bit of the fractals of nature, just because I promised some pretty pictures, and then we'll get into some experience thing. One of the simplest is simply branches. A tree has a trunk and branches, which has more branches and more branches and more branches. You can actually calculate from 2 trees. I won't tell you the whole story. But from 2 trees, if you measure the diameter of all the branches on those trees and get a proportionate relationship of the different diameters of branches, you can actually calculate the sizes of trees in an entire forest. It's really cool. Again. Did you know in this fractal world that we live in, the geometry of the petal pattern of a daisy is the exact geometry of the chlorophyll molecule, which brings life to plants? Your DNA carries tremendous amounts of information in a very small space. Its geometry allows it to replicate with incredible accuracy and efficiently, see? I always love to, please let me show you the picture of your DNA. Instead of side view, shot down the shaft. It's simply a beautiful flower. We are fractal at our core, not only within ourselves, but in all that exists. Buckminster Fuller said the world is built on a framework of triangles. And we see it happen in all of the structuring of all living things. We are all built according to the same proportion called the golden mean. And it repeats over and over and over again. Do you guys see the Bodyworks exhibit? The plastic, really cool and really kind of creepy at the same time. Yeah, this is essentially the arterial system, colorized and plasticized. And from this simple branching of arteries and arteries and arteries, ultimately into capillaries, you see an entire duck and a rabbit. That's why when chemicals go into the system, they can disperse so completely throughout the physiology because of that repeated pattern over and over again. A hand and a face. Again, we are beautiful and infinite in our design. I tell you what, when people come in and say, oh, my stupid body, I'm like, oh my gosh, please. It is so brilliant and so smart and supports us in such incredible ways when we really don't treat it very nicely most of the time. And yet it functions. I tell you what, I had no idea until I started reading the histories of people who come in, how truly much people experience. And still, we're halfway nice, functional human beings walking around on the planet. Our bodies are so incredible. So here's what I discovered. So I'm in my practice, goofing around, saying, okay, what's connected to what? And what I was feeling is these big tracts of tension, right? They'd come up through the legs, and then it'd seem like they'd anchor into somewhere. And then that tension would continue up, and it'd anchor into somewhere else. And it'd continue up, and it'd anchor into something else. And I'm like, wow, these are connected. And it seemed that if I accessed and released where it anchored in, the whole thing would shift. I was like, wow. And what was cool about feeling what was connected to what is that you started to get a sense of working with the body as an integrated whole, as opposed to, oh, this part hurts, let's do something with it. Oh, this part hurts, let's do something with it. And you actually could see where it was all coming from. Once I understood the geometry in the body, I don't care what crazy stuff people started coming in with, it all made perfect sense based on how the tension was and how it was pulling. And so I'm goofing around with this great geometry. It's triangular. There's one at the sacrum here. And then there's another one, if you take the base of your ribs, there's a base there, and then it goes to a point right at the top of your sacrum. And then there's another one where the base is just above that. The sides go between your shoulder blades, and then the point of it's right up here, the base of your neck. There's another one where the base is right under your skull, and then the point goes down. And then there's another one where the base is at your skull. It arcs over your head and ends up right here. And then another one where the base goes across your shoulders. The sides go along the top of your clavicle. And then it ends up right here at the top of your breastbone. And what I realized is that if that track of tension came up and it anchored into the base of that triangle, then guess where else it was going to anchor into? The bases of all the other triangles. Totally cool. If it anchored into the point, guess what? It was going to anchor into all the other points. There was this beautiful way to understand the complexities of the body. Because I tell you what, if we took somebody, put them up here, laid them on a table, and had a few people who are in the business palpate them, I bet you we could all find different things to do. It's never a question of is there something to do. It's of all the millions of things you got going on, which one do you want to do first? And so it made sense to me if the body was showing a whole pattern, then it was saying, oh, this is the one I want to do. Beautiful, wonderful. I'm clicking along in my practice, having a good time, right? Anyway, I won't tell you this. Do you want the story? Yeah. So here's what's happening. I'm going out to California to teach a seminar. What I noticed in the practice, because in addition to the geometry, there's these energy dynamics that happen. And I'm reading this book on spirals because I'm noticing that the energy's starting to move on the spirals, the people I'm working with, right? And in this book on spirals, there's a picture with a spiral superimposed over what's called the tree of life from the Kabbalah. And I'm looking at it. So there's the geometry of the body. I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's the same geometry. Isn't that cool? The flight attendant wasn't really impressed, but I thought it was kind of cool. So I get to the seminar, I teach the whole seminar. At the very end, I say, by the way, there's a geometry of the body, because I wasn't covering the geometry, I was just doing a palpation thing. I said, there's a geometry of the body, and interestingly enough, that geometry is the same as the tree of life. Hey, have a great weekend. Thanks for coming. And I dismissed them. Well, this woman after the seminar, this woman comes up to me and she says, Sue, do you know what that means? And I said, do I know what means? She said, the whole tree of life. Do you know what that means? And I said, no, not really. Again, I discovered geometry, sacred geometry. I was just goofing around trying to find an effective way to adjust people, right? I said, no, not really. And she said, look into it. And I said, okay. And then she grabbed me, freaked me out. She grabbed me by the shoulders and she said, Sue, look into it. And I said, you're freaking me out, but okay. So I go to my source of all things, Donna, and said, hey, do you know anything about the tree of life? She brings me like volumes of books. And I said, can you give me the Cliff Notes or something? So here's what I've understood. And there's a quote here. Here's what I understand, is that the tree of life, and please let me preface this by saying I am not a Kabbalistic scholar. I've done a little reading. The study of the Kabbalah is a lifelong study. But what I understand, the tree of life is from the Kabbalah, which is the ancient book of Jewish mysticism. And what it said is that when spirit descended to become man, it happened in a lightning bolt. And that lightning bolt was the path that spirit traveled. And essentially what it created was this relationship. Each of those circles is called a sephirot, and it's considered to be one of the divine faces or the divine aspects of God. And the 22 connecting paths, in that you have the entire Hebrew alphabet. But it's considered to be the model upon which everything, including man as microcosm, is modeled. And so I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, this is kind of freaking me out just a little bit. I was just goofing around, found this geometry. It was very handy. It was like clockwork. I could predict. If I knew where one of the places it landed, I could tell you exactly where else in the system it was going to land. And then I find out that it's the same as this. I'm starting to read more and more about the tree of life. And what they say is that just as spirit traveled this path to become man, man will reascend and travel that path to reconnect with spirit. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, man, this is a little big. Because I tell you what, even though I was totally committed to releasing the interference to the expression of the infinite potential in all beings, I hadn't really thought about what that meant on a deeper and on a spiritual level. And I tell you what, if expressing more of that infinite potential isn't traveling along that path to reconnect with the infinite, I don't know what is. And right away, it shifted from this intellectual thing down into that heart, and I was like, whoa. And there was part of me that's like, how can I say this or even think it? I'm a chiropractor. Yeah. And then I remembered a quote by D.D. Palmer. He said, who discovered chiropractic, he said, the sole purpose of chiropractic is to reunite man the physical with man the spiritual. When I first read those words, I'm like, oh, those are lovely. And now when I remembered them in this context, I'm like, wow, what if? What if? What was fascinating as we started to work with people is that the geometry actually started to express in other planes of the body. Let me tell you a little bit, and again, I'm not a Kabbalistic scholar, but this is a tree of life. You'll notice there are 3 vertical pillars, and those are, the one down the centers are equilibrium, and then the passive is on the right, the active on the left. And it's thought that that movement between essentially us navigating the different aspects of God is how we move through life. And it's essentially balancing and navigating that and coming to peace with that flow that allows us to move up through that path. Just to give you the sephirot, and for anybody who's studied or speak the language, I'll apologize in advance for my very Midwestern pronunciation of these words. But Keter is at the top. Geometrically in the body, it's right up here. And essentially, it's considered the crown. It's all that was, all that is, and all that will be. And what's interesting in that finding that geometry, and keep in mind, I was just goofing around, and this is where the geometry was, right? Every picture I've ever seen that connects us to that infinite, guess where it happens? Right off that crown. The next ones, and these are in balance, Hakman, and then Bana on the other side. Essentially, geometrically, those sit right here, right? And so Hakman is wisdom or that inner intellect. So those things we just kind of know. Balanced on the other side of that is Bana, which is a reflective intellect. And those are the things that we reflect on and kind of learn, right? And with most people, that balance between that right brain, left brain, that intellectual knowledge and that intuitive knowledge is sometimes a bit of a battle. And what we notice in people, and what's interesting, it's reflected in the patterning, is that you'll see those kind of distortions, where those people that are locked very much in that intellectual, you'll see that heavier patterning there, the people who are kind of locked in that intuitive. And you say, why did you do that? I don't know, it just felt right. Yeah, but why? It just felt right. And then other people who won't take a step unless it's calculated out. You see that in the patterning. And what's incredible in the body is that, man, that so sits right in that right brain, left brain hemisphere. The next one, Da'at. Da'at, this is usually where it's represented, but it's not considered to be a stationary place on the tree. And how I've heard it described is it's the finger of God. It's that thing that just one instant happens and completely changes the course of your life. One of mine was when my sister handed me a pamphlet on chiropractic school. I was going to be an oceanographer. I had no intention of being a chiropractor, right? My sister gave me that pamphlet. I read it, and in a moment, the direction of my life was changed. It's that choice to take a different way to work, and you avoid a huge accident. It's that choice on a spur of the moment to go get coffee, and you see your best friend from school that you haven't seen forever. And that starts a whole nother reminiscence in your life. Right? Next one, these two sit right on the shoulders, and this is where we weigh it out. Hesed, it's extreme generosity. It's that I will give you absolutely everything. Luckily balanced is Gevura on the other side, which is just a little bit of discernment. I want to give my children everything. However, the realization that maybe that's not going to serve. And that sits so heavy on our shoulders. And again, you can see it reflected. When somebody comes in and that weight of the world and their patterning is on their shoulders, you can feel that argument back and forth of what their heart wants to do and what they feel is appropriate and what their heart yearns for and yet what they should do. It all just sits right there. You can see it weighing. And it's reflected in the patterning. Teferet, it's our heart of hearts. Geometrically, it sits right here on the body. And again, when that locks up, you can feel it in the patterning. You can feel how that grips not only their physical heart, but also their lungs, where we just love to hold our grief, our guilt, which further closes us down. There are times where, you say something to somebody on the table and they're like, how did you know? And it's like, you know what? It's all geometry. As I started to study more and more about the tree of life, it's like, oh my gosh, it makes perfect sense. What I'm seeing clinically, what I hear in their words and in what they're feeling, it makes perfect sense. And awareness of this as you go through life, you feel that tension build up in your shoulders and it's like, okay, what am I arguing with in myself? You see that tension build up in your chest and it's like, oh, even if it's challenging, perhaps to love more, to trust more, to take a breath more, because it all has, everything physically has an emotional mental hit to it. Netzah and Hod sit right here. Netzah is instinct, it's impulse, it's that animal, it's that somebody startles you and by gosh, you just want to hit them. Luckily, on the other side of that is Hod, which is just a little bit of cognitive control that maybe you just, you want to hit them, but maybe you shouldn't. Or you walk and you see the person of your dreams and you know that it's meant to be, but before you lay a big kiss on them, you at least introduce yourself first. A little bit of cognitive control. Again, right at that solar plexus where it sits, and you can tell that. That grips there, boy, those adrenals start to fire and the person is just on overload, where everything in their system wants to drive instinct, and yet control, grip it tighter. You can feel it, you can see it. There are no accidents, there's a perfect geometry to the body. Are you having fun? Is this? Yeah. Cool. Yesod sits here, right? It's our action, our perception in and of the world. Interestingly, there are many yogic practices that say that life enters at L5 right here. Essentially, that's when we come into this plane, when we are here, that's what anchors us into that reality. And again, the people that have that low back gripping, often there's this battle between that cognitive control, that instinct, and then that foundation of should I, could I, this, that support in the world. Do I really have what I need to? Can I trust the world that I'm in? Can I take that action? You can just feel it battling through their whole system. The final one, Malkut. It's right at your tailbone. And that's essentially the presence of God in matter. And again, whenever you see those pictures where we're connected to Earth, guess where it is? Coming right through that bottom. You can tell those people, that tucked tailbone, they're going, do I really want to be on the planet? It's a little scary here. You can see it so strongly in their physiology. Every single one of these. I was going to take you through some distortions so that you can feel them, but it's not particularly pleasant. Okay, never mind. When I teach seminars, I make the students sometimes go into these huge postures, and then, of course, we adjust them and clear it all out later, but it's a little nasty in the room for a while. And so here's the relationships. There's this beautiful geometry of the body and this connection to this ancient spiritual teaching. If you study anything of sacred geometry, the flower of life, Metatron's cube, all of those things are derived essentially from different derivations of this. It's an ancient, beautiful knowledge. This from the Kabbalistic tradition. Interestingly, there are also relations to the Hindu tradition, the Vedic tradition. Carolyn Mace made, with Anatomy of the Spirit, popularized this. This isn't from her book, but essentially also if you take a look at it, and if you take a look at the energy centers of the body, they also relate to this geometry. And so at the base of the spine, where Malkut is Muladhara. In the genitals is Svadhisthana, which is where you saw this. In the solar plexus, where Had and Netzad are, is Manipura. At the heart, which is Anahata, it's three of them. It's Teferet, Gevura, and Hesed together. And then Visuddhi at the throat is where Da'at is typically represented. Azna, which is the midbrain, is where Bana and Hakman are, through here. And then Sahasraha is Keter at the top. Now, what's interesting about this dynamic is there's not only for those who are very aware of their chakras, as you're starting to release these patterns, you'll feel that pulsing and that shifting happen through the system, and it's part of the energy dynamic and flow. But also you'll see it in the dynamic of what the person's working through. You'll notice that some of those relationships have a single sephirot associated with them, and others have two or three. And what they say that has to do with is how we learn and what they call internal and external dualities. Essentially, our internal dualities are the things that we need to figure out on our own. Okay? All by ourselves, nobody can handle that for us. We really need to navigate that. With Had and Netzah, essentially that has to do with balancing our thoughts and our feelings. It's like, okay, this is what I really, really feel like I want to do, and yet this is what I feel like I should do or think I should do. And again, that's that constant battle that just hits our sense of self so very strongly. And again, you can see that in the patterning when that whole base of that geometry is squeezed and constricted. You can see in people's patterning and their experience how that keeps them from moving forward, how it chokes out their sense of self. And that whole thing of figuring out, it's hard to balance your thoughts and your feelings when your sense of self is completely on shutdown and locked up. And as that opens up, how they step fully into it. Binah and Hakman, that has to do with that whole, that ideal spiritual and our free will, right? On that bigger consciousness plane, here's what I know is the most loving, conscious, expanded choice to make, and yet I just don't want to. It's just too hard sometimes. I would love to reduce my footprint on the planet. I would love to be totally green. However, I have an office where we generate paper. We try to reduce it, but we still generate paper to hand to people. I fly all over and teach. And tons of money is spent in air travel. I tell you what, I have a huge composter. And it's sat in my shed now for 2 seasons. Because it's just too much with the 3 dogs to keep the tub around because they always want to get the top out. There's all this stuff that, gosh, I want to be such a conscious person, and yet sometimes it's too much energy. It's too exhausting to be conscious about every full thing. But it's an internal thing. Nobody can should us into it. Nobody can legislate us into it. We got to figure it out ourselves. The most complex one, where Teferet, Gevurah, and Hesed meet, this is truly that soul life lesson of how open can my heart be and still be safe. One of the reasons we lock up here, one of the reasons why the body has structured this nice breastbone, these nice ribs, all here is because, not just because there's vital organs there, but there's vital centers here. This is not only where our heart of heart is, it's where we navigate. I want to be completely open-hearted, but sometimes I'm in an environment that it would just be too damaging. How do we navigate when we can fully open up and when we need to just keep a little bit of distance and yet not shut off completely? That is all navigated right here. Having awareness of that, and again, I don't want to take you into the distortion of it, but having an awareness of that center, how important it is consciously shifting, stretching with that thought of love, of expansion. Often the biggest thing is the love of self. It's amazing the differences we can make when we breathe, not just but to do it with feeling, with thought, with intention. All internal dualities. The external dualities, this is stuff where, we kind of need people around us to navigate this. Malkut, essentially that's survival in the world. Well, if you're going to figure out how to survive in the world, guess where you got to be? In the world. Donna always told me, she said, it's easy to get enlightened on a mountaintop. Get enlightened when you're sitting on the back of the bus with 3 screaming kids and the person next to you smoking and the other person yelling at you. Get enlightened there. Then you know you're solid, right? You know you're on that path. Yesod, interpersonal relationships. Again, it's an external duality. We need that person to mirror, to bounce off of, to navigate where we are in the world. Da'at is expression or communication. I tell you what, when I make up my PowerPoint and have this lecture going on in the head, it makes so much sense to me. And then sometimes I say it out loud and I see the furrowed brow and it's like, okay, maybe not quite so much. I get the, again, unless we have somebody to bounce it off of, we really just don't know whether it makes sense to anybody but us. Kater, it's a realization of unity, both within and without. I tell you what, when I'm all by myself, life is good. And then y'all get in my way, right? It's easy to feel this expansion of love and this unity when you're hanging out with people who so agree with you and you love them. And then not quite so much when you're hanging out with people who don't maybe agree quite so much with you. Can you still feel that sense of unity, that love, standing next to the person who is spouting principles that you will spend your life going against? That's the thing. All of these things we see navigate, all those internal dualities or the external dualities go right down our core. And that's why when we approach somebody, that full center, shoomp, we want to meet them there. Being very aware of that center, that core, knowing who we are, and yet fully connected because we need them in every interaction to grow to walk our path. The internal dualities, they sit out at the sides and wave us back and forth, cause us, demand of us that we move forward, that we balance it. Again, as we move through our bodies to be aware of this, as we exercise, as we do yoga, as we stretch, to be aware of the relationships in the body is a very powerful, powerful thing. Because if you want to release that potential within you, I tell you what, there are some patterns that it's handy if you've got somebody with a little bit of perspective on it. I know for me, my system's pretty efficient at releasing stuff. However, there are some things in me, many things in me, that have been there for so long and are so much a part of who I am that I don't even recognize them as being anything except who I am. I need somebody with perspective on it to say, hey, do you know that you've got some crumbs on your chin here? Hey, did you know this was here and that it's not who you are? It's something, a potential you can become. There are other things that, you know what, as we become more aware of this geometry of our body, you can release on your own. You're feeling that tension through the core of your body. When you do your yoga practice, be aware of this, or your breath, or just stretching or exercising to be aware of that dynamic as it moves through, to perhaps move through some of these things. Just a possibility. How you guys doing? Guess what? And we're going to get to an exercise soon. You said you didn't want to go into distortions, so I can't be held responsible for you not being out of your chairs for that. So here's what was happening clinically. The back of the system was opening up so much that it could not release any further until, guess what? The front of the body had to be released. I found these tracks of tension, places where it anchored in, geometric relationships. There was a big part of me that was hoping that it wasn't the same geometry as was in the back. But guess what? It was. The same series of triangles pointing up, pointing down through the front of the body. Then what happened in the dynamic of the system is the back would open up, the front was open up, this dance back and forth. And then there came a point where it could open up no further until you started to look at the relationship between the two. Everybody take a deep breath in and just hold it. Not expand it. Hold it. Feel that internal tension it creates. Okay, you can breathe now. I was going to push it for a little while just to see if you'd actually wait for me to say you could breathe, but I'd hate on the webcast for people to be passing out, so it's what we call sagittal tension. It's a dynamic between the back of the body and the front of the body where essentially it squeezes in. People with a very high sagittal tension, have you ever seen those people that are just a little smaller than they ought to be? You take a look at them from the side and it's like, where are your lungs? Because their rib cage is so flat. Or you take a look at them from the front and it's like when they were a little kid, they got shut in the bus door and they just never quite sprung back. They're just a little too narrow. Those people tend to have a lot of sagittal tension. They tend to have a lot of environmental sensitivities, often apologetic for the space they take up on the planet, let alone the air they breathe. Right? Sagittal. Boom. The next one, the sagittals, and open up this beautiful dance between the anterior, the posterior, these spirals awakening in the system, opening up. And then what happened, there was such flexibility in the system that the body actually seemed to be looking at not just its relationship internally, but its relationship to the environment around them. Huge patterns started to go down the arms, the legs, the same tracking system. And guess what? Down the arms, the legs, same geometry. Sagittals in 3 dimensions, because it's a relationship between the front and the back, the same geometry. How it makes sense to me and how we typically describe them is that, say, the back or the posterior is you. The anterior geometry or the front of the geometry is your partner, your significant other. The sagittals are that third entity that's created by the two of you in relationship. It's a much more dynamic. And then the coronals that go down the arms and the legs is when the two of you, it's the fourth dynamic that's created when the two of you go out in public and begin to relate with the in-laws, with their friends, with your friends, which, again, a much more complex environment. And what was incredible is that you actually started to see it in how the person was expressing on the table. When we were working with the back, a lot of it had to do with structure. You know, getting their system stable, getting it to open up, not only the structure where the bones are positioned, but the actual structure of tissue. As we started to work with the front of the body, you started to see a lot more changes clinically in the organs and the chemistry of the body. People more often would have emotions come up. When the sagittals started to open up, that's when people's belief systems started to come into play. People who never really started talking to me started talking to me. And for any of you who've been in my practice, I don't talk very much, right? Much to the dismay of many people who want to see me. But they're talking to me, and their conversation, they're starting to make connections about, wow, I realize that it's when I go to see these people, that's when I get those headaches. Or it's when I eat this, that's when I get all stressed out. They started to see relationships between some of the things that they're doing and how it was affecting. A lot of people started really questioning, okay, you know, who am I? Who am I as a woman, as a partner, as a parent, as a professional? All of these things just kind of start popping into the head. And so it seemed that people's belief systems were really associated with that sagittals. And it made so much sense because, man, it's our beliefs that just lock us up so terribly. When the coronals that go down the arms and the legs, when those started opening up, then the whole conversation started to go, okay, I'm figuring out who I am, but who am I in relation to you? To my boss, to my partner, to my kids? People actually started to redefine even looking at their spirituality, looking at the environment, people starting to become a little bit more conscious of what was going on with other people in the waiting room. One of the things I love about my practice, it's just a big old family there. And maybe people's first 2 times in or something like that, you can see them, you can tell the new people because they're just kind of there reading their books. And then as the patterns start to open up, you start to see this blossoming that happens that now people are helping each other out to the car. They're like, hey, let me help you with this. It's just this huge community because that's how the system opens up. It's our natural state to live in community. It's our natural state to care about people. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of getting the gunk out of the way. I see these things happening clinically, and guess what? Ultimately, there's 4 trees that conjoin to create what's called Jacob's ladder, which is the entire path that we will travel all the way to connect with the infinite. They say that the first tree, it's the world of action, and in the human body has to do with our structure. The second tree, it's the world of formation. It has to do with our organs, our chemistry, our emotions. The third tree, it's the world of creation, has to do with our mind, our belief systems. And the fourth tree, the world of emanations, essentially our relationships. What was freaky to me is that, you know what? Again, clinically, this is what we were finding. And then I read it. There are no accidents in this world. You know, I'm somebody who's more of, you know, I'm the science geek. I love math. My degree's from an engineering college. My trip into spirituality happened through trying to understand the body. Seeing the connection, seeing the usefulness in releasing, noticing things clinically. And guess what? We are sacred geometry. We are a perfect expression of this infinite intelligence in every single possible way. These are the four primary planes. Guess what? The body's fractal. There's geometry within geometry within geometry, patterns that repeat again and again and again. Yeah, we're going to skip over this and get to the good part. Guess what? This is just to say, well, not that this isn't good, but it's 8:35, right? I know, time travels fast for me, when I'm talking. I don't know about for you.
What was the first tree that you said? The first tree of the four?
Action. And so there was the discovery that actually the geometry is not triangular, it's tetrahedral. Okay? And so the posterior triangles extend into the front of the body, the anterior triangles extend into the back of the body. Did you know that when your cells divide, it goes from a single cell to two cells, the polars, and then it goes to a tetrahedron. And when they split again, it goes to a star tetrahedron. It's kind of cool. And just here's some pictures. This is the geometry that actually is your body. And so the blue is the front of the body, the red is the back. And so the back extends into the front. And this is what brings our depth. Once you take something from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, you actually have the feel of the whole. And what's interesting about that, and so imagine, there's triangles that point up, triangles that point down. The triangle in the back extends to a point in the front. The triangle in the front extends to a point in the back. So geometrically, when you look down the core of the body, this is what you see. The Star of David, but even more than that, the Sri Yantra. Okay? Now remember, we said your geometry is a perfect expression of your music, a perfect expression of the energy that you are. Now the Sri Yantra is a mandala, which is a visual mantra. You know, mantra is a word, the most famous is probably Om, that carries a particular vibration, that if you repeat that, then it sets up that vibration in your system. Well, this is a visual representation of essentially creation. And so it's the male and female coming together, and it's considered that from that springs the entire manifest world. Well, that running through, geometrically running through the core of us is the power of creation. Now tune in, just for a moment, just tune in right to your core. Feel it from the bottom of that tree of life in your geometry, coming all the way up through that center pillar. It's where your spine is, right? It's no mistake that your spinal cord is running right through that center. Right? as those electrical impulses go up and down through there, essentially it creates this huge torus, energetic flow, this amazing field that circles around and runs straight up through your core. Geometrically, it's a perfect representation of the power that you are running through that center. Because what happens is that the music forms your geometry, and then in the geometry taking form, it resonates and plays back that same music. Energy is not something that flows through you, it is you. In going through that reconnection and releasing that infinite potential, what's happening is not only is your system integrating that piece of information, that music becoming part of the field that you are, and you taking that evolutionary step, but with each step, with each time, as your system connects to the geometry in the back, the geometry in the front, the geometry that is the relationship, the geometry as it connects, essentially your system is remembering its connectedness. And in remembering its connectedness, it becomes whole. If I'm going to walk through that wall, then you know what needs to happen? My entire being needs to get that I am energy. My entire being, my consciousness needs to know that that's connected to that, and part of that, and part of that, and that repeats through every single layer. Cellularly, all the way down to my atoms. It needs to connect with, oh my gosh, as I go through and connect with my fractal nature and everything that's connected to everything else, ultimately I get to a place of awareness of energy and flow so that I experience myself as connected. I experience myself as the energetic being that I am. That's the evolution that is possible and can happen as we connect with our geometry. Because as we connect with it, we resonate back, our consciousness recognizes it, and it simply becomes part of who we are, not something that we just know is possible. Fractals. So here's the cool thing that's happened now. So, goofing around with the geometry, coronals are swinging, spirals are waking up, energy's flowing through, we see the dimensionality, see the Shri through the cord, cool things are happening in the office. Yay. Just kind of goof around still. One of the things that we notice happen, and this is in no particular order. Anybody ever have an experience where it's like all of a sudden you have an epiphany of something, and you have no idea how you're going to get there, but you know it's possible? Yeah? This is how it is clinically sometimes. It's like there's days in the office where all of a sudden just stuff happening, and it's like this crack in the cosmic egg occurs. All this weird freaky stuff starts happening, and you go, wow, now I know this is possible. Now how do we get there? It's like here's a glimpse of what's possible. Because here's the deal. Truly, if I get that everything's holographic from that one place, I can connect to all with her. Not only is she holographic, guess what? We all are. And we're all connected. There's a concept in chiropractic called the hole-in-one. It's where from adjusting in one place, you release all the subluxations in the system. Well, the hole-in-one, for me, is where from one place, on one person, we connect with the infinite potential and information that exists in the universe, connect with every living being in the universe, and from that one place, with one touch, all of a sudden, every living being is expressing the infinite information of the universe. We have the creation of a bunch of perfect primordial beings and heaven on earth. Should we just do it now? Right, so here's what's necessary. First off, I gotta have the skill. I tell you straight up, I'm good at what I do, but I'm not quite there yet. But you know the other thing we need? People who are ready. Have you ever seen that exponential curve? That growth curve? Essentially, it's that one that takes off slowly and then it curves up and then all of a sudden points skyward. And it's exponential growth, right? Well, if we take a look at that and the growth of our consciousness, I think that we're right here where it's starting to curve up. When we get to the place where we're here, then I think that adjustment will be possible. Right? But we're still here. And so the thing is the question is, not just in the magic of a moment, not just in when we're at this big seminar and this huge loving field is built that magical things can happen. We've all been there, right? But in our everyday lives, when we're sitting on the back of the bus with the two screaming kids and the person smoking and yelling at you, right? How do we get to a place where our physiology, again, I think it's through integrating that and becoming conscious of our geometry. What was happening is that, what I'd see happen, and so we've got these triangles pointing down, and we're just about to an exercise. It seemed, instead of these like 6 triangles pointing up and pointing down, what was happening is that it almost felt clinically as if you can imagine there's a base of a triangle here, saying at the base of sacrum, it almost felt as if this triangle, which also pointed down, was pushing down through there. The ones that were pointing up were pushing. And then it seemed like the geometry was just simply reshaping and forming. And what I realized is that the body was just showing us that fractal of the triangles on a bigger scale. And so what happened is that all the triangles pointing down started to form this, let me back up, started to form this huge triangle where the point of it was right down at the bottom of the pelvis, and the base of it, if you were to extend the arms out, was right there. All the ones pointing up, the point of it came up to the head here and went down, and the base of it went out to the bottom of the feet. And there were these beautiful points that showed up where the patterning just seemed to lock it there at the top of the head, the hands here, right? The bottom of the pelvis here, at the bottom of the feet. And the body was going into this huge star pattern, which is the star tetrahedron. The star tetrahedron has some interesting significance geometrically, also called the merkaba. And there's tons and tons and tons of stuff out there on the star tetrahedron and the merkaba. You could do like a month-long seminar on it. Here's the stuff that I want to kind of bring to light, though. Essentially, the star tetrahedron, it's where our inseparable parts come into equilibrium. So our spirit and matter, right? It's where they come together and truly merge and become one and inseparable. Within the star tetrahedron, essentially, is the information of all. Interestingly, the silicon chip that's responsible for memory in the computer, guess what its geometry is? The star tetrahedron. It essentially is the shape and the geometry of memory, of knowledge, of knowingness. In the body, essentially expressing that star tetrahedron, it started to express more its holographic nature. When you're first working with somebody, geometrically, it's maybe one pattern at a time, one experience at a time releasing. Then what happens is that the body gets to a level of flexibility where it says, wait, this experience is related to this one and caused me to view this one this way. And the system will start working with combinations because it realizes that none of our experiences happen by themselves. They always have ripple effects. Well, as the body starts to work with more complex things, then it starts to see itself in a more connected way. When it starts to go into these fractal patterns, the body's going, wait, I can see the entirety and the completeness of me. I, instead of seeing 5 or 6 patterns, can see thousands of patterns, all of them building into this amazing potential within me that is ready to awaken. And so what I'd love to do, if you're up for it, now that we're past the putting you in distortions, is give you just a quick experience of the merkaba in your body, okay? So we're going to review here. The triangles that point down, essentially we're going to talk you through them merging with the ones that point up, okay? And so the ones that point down, and we're going to combine them, is at the pelvis. And so the base of it is right at the top of your pelvis, and then the point goes down to the bottom of your pelvis and the tip of your tailbone, okay? So that's one that points down. And then there's another one from the base of the ribs that points down, okay? The other ones that point down is across your shoulders, and that points down. And the one that's right across at the base of your skull and points down. And so those 4 are going to merge to create this huge that goes, the base that goes out to your arms, and then the point all the way to the bottom of your pelvis, and I'll talk you through that. Then the ones that point up, it's kind of a weird one. Can I use you for a second? Standing sideways. It points up from the base here, but then also from the abdomen here, it points up. And so it's angled a little bit. But there's one through here that points up, and then the one at the top of your head that points up, okay? Thank you. And so those are going to merge together where the base, essentially, if you imagined your feet going out this way, the base is from one foot to the other, and then the point's going to come up at the top of your head. So what we'll do is we'll take you through feeling all of them that point down, those merging together, and then tuning into all of them point up, and those merging together. And then once they're merged, you're going to feel them extend out to the front, to the point, and the back, okay? Allow whichever one feels appropriate to you to go. They say it's different in males and female, and the spin is different, and blah, blah, blah. I tend to be resistant to gender-specific things because I think we have those aspects in all of us, and one may be dominant, blah, blah, blah. And so what I want you to do is simply allow to feel that. Extend up, forward, and back. Cool? You ready?
Yeah. What are the pointing up?
The ones that point up, essentially, it's from here up to here, and then a base here up to here.
So it's just 2.
And then there's another one that's from here to here. These are actually part of the same triangle, or tetrahedron, right? Pyramid, whatever you want to call it. Cool? Cool. So you can stand, sit, whatever you want, but just get in a little comfy place. Okay, so first I'm simply going to have you, and we're going to have you go ahead and put your hands there, just on this first one. One hand on the back of your sacrum, one hand on the front of your pelvis. And then again, you can close your eyes. And I just want you to really tune in to that geometry. Feel the base at the top of your pelvis. Feel as it points down, it also seems to almost make you want to sink down into the floor. Okay? And so the energy moving in the direction of that point. And feel yourself ground into it. And then not losing awareness of that, but bringing into your awareness that triangle that starts at the base of the ribs and points down all the way to the low back. And I want you to feel that point extending through the base of that pelvic triangle. And feel it extend down and extend down all the way till it meets the point of that pelvic triangle. As it does that, I want you to feel the bases broaden a little bit, extending beyond the boundaries of your body. Feeling them merge. And as they do that, tune into that triangle pointing down right at your chest plate, at your breastbone. Feel the bases start to extend beyond the shoulders, out through the arms. Feel the points start to extend down and merge with the other geometries, extending down all the way to the point of your pelvis, extending out to the length of your arms, meeting up, creating one huge triangle. Feeling it extend, feeling it ground into the earth. And then that next triangle pointing down from the base of your skull. Imagine that point extending down. Imagine the base extending all the way to the palms of your hands. The point extending down, 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 down till it meets with right at the bottom of your pelvis, all the other points. Tuning in and feeling now this huge geometry, all of it extending out and grounding you to the earth. And now, starting with the geometries, pointing up, the one at the base of your skull that extends to the top of your head, feeling that lift you as that energy moves up, while keeping awareness of that, going to that geometry from the base of your ribs that points up, feeling the point begin to extend up toward that triangle in your head. Feeling the base begin to expand out and stretch down. As the points extending up, the base extending all the way down to the hips, extending out to the legs, feeling it expand, expand, and stretch all the way till it meets the bottom of your feet. Feeling it lift you up as the other connects you to earth, this one drawing you to heaven. Tuning into those energies as they come together, moving in different directions, pulling you in different directions, and yet so completely inseparable, merged, somehow bringing an awareness of your wholeness. And now as you tune in, feel each of those geometries, one extending to a point in the front, way beyond the confines of your body, stretching out, and now one extending to the back, again beyond the confines of your body. Now not only your spirit seeking to ground and to extend to heaven, but also to extend out into the world. Allowing yourself to feel the resonance of that geometry. Being aware as you tap in that it may start to move. You may feel the geometry start to wobble a little, start to spiral, start to flow. Being aware as your breath extends out to every cell. Being aware that in this state, you truly connect to all the information that is you. From this state, you can ask, how's my heart? How is my liver? Any part of you, that information is available to you. Not having to shift your awareness, but simply expanding into the knowingness. And now coming back in. Feeling first the points extending forward and back. Begin to come closer to your body. Feeling the geometries that point down. Begin to go back to their natural state. The ones that point up, beginning to recede back to the core of the body, retracting through the arms, the legs. The triangle that points up from the base of the rib cage, beginning to pull that point back in. The triangles pointing down, beginning to return to the neck, the chest, the low back. Feeling the individual geometries. Feeling yourself come back into the awareness of your body, being grounded, not losing that state of connection, but simply being able to move life through that way. That star tetrahedron is always a part of us. It's our natural state, whether it's the big one or whether it's small. Tuning into that aspect of you takes you to that place of connection within yourself. And truly with others. And so just starting to move your shoulders. Move your hands. Again, keeping that feeling of connection in every cell, in your awareness, and just approaching life that way. Cool?
Yeah.
This is our geometry as it gets big. Guess what? It's our state of being. Yeah. And again, you can tap into that at any point. Maybe it's because, I'm a science geek. I've done meditations before. I'm not somebody who, take me on a little visualization and my mind is wandering. It just does. I'm so very kinesthetic. I need to feel it in my body. It's through the geometry that I found a path to spirituality that was real to me, that then could shift into it. Once I had the experience then, it's like I could get people's sense of faith and devotion. Before it was here, this took me into it. The same geometry of that star tetrahedron, you can experience on finer and finer levels. During the person's evolution, there'll be times where the entirety of the geometry you'll feel just in the cranium. And I swear I could be there just a half hour, and from that place, you can see everything. From that place, people will say, oh my God, you were up here, but I felt it shifting. All these other places. Because their awareness got there. Okay, so it's 9:00. Do you want to go into a little freaky land? Like we haven't been there yet? So here's the deal. And again, please know, you guys, this is just what we were goofing around. This is just what we were finding. This was the next step in people's evolution as their system was just opening up to different levels of awareness, right? One of the next things that showed up typically, because the geometry extends into the body, you'd feel these points on the surface, but your awareness would be drawn into the depth. Well, there came a point where you'd feel these just huge patterns just seemingly squeezing the system. And you do your typical thing. You know, I find the contact on the surface, but as I'd extend in, it's almost like things got harder. And I have a rule. If I'm working hard, then something's wrong. Because here's the deal. If I'm putting my finger on the place where the potential's the greatest, their system ought to grab me by the coat collar and yank me in so strong that I can't resist, right? I shouldn't have to work to get there. Well, it seemed like I was working hard. And so I'm like, what's going on? Well, what I realized is that instead of tuning in, guess what? We had to, from the body, tune out into the field. Because the geometry, guess what? Just like our energy doesn't stop here. It continues here. And so there were these other geometries that extended from the body out. And what was interesting is that as they would open up, people would say things like, gosh, it was like just a weight that I've been carrying my entire life was lifted. There were people who typically would view things as kind of, you know, I've just been born somebody with bad luck. It's just part of who I am. Or, you know what, ever since the day I was born, the world was out to get me. That kind of conversation. Them feeling like that kind of thing had lifted. People, interestingly enough, having flashes of themselves in other lives. And, you know, whether your belief is in past life, concurrent life, whatever, the feel of them is that the patterns that we're lifting had to do with some very deep karmic soul lessons, things they came in this life that they needed to work through. And as the patterning shifted, there was this weight that lifted so they could go through. The geometry of it is that of two trees conjoined. Locking in. It's what we call the secondary planes. Another evolution that we saw, they're called the transverse planes. And maybe we'll give you an experience of these too. They're kind of fun. There comes a point where the geometry of the body starts to fade, right? And at that point, it becomes much more about the flows. And so what happens, as you can imagine, and so there's this energy stored in the system, right? And so what do you think is going to happen when I release this energy from the system? You're going to see a wave of energy move through, right? Boom, it pops up. Well, what you'll often see on the table is you release that and the person's breathing will start to open up. And it's just that wave of energy moving through. Sometimes people will even start to move. It's like, God, I got to stretch. Or they'll feel it's like a sneeze comes up. They got to move, right? That's just those waves of energy moving through the system. And they'll start to pulse like this. And they go up the back and down the front. In that cosmic orbit, they'll flow here. And then as the body starts to open up, you'll see them come together and you'll start to see it actually happen in spirals through the system. And sometimes you'll see that manifested outside. Sometimes you just feel it really close to the core. Where there comes a point where it's the body truly is looking at itself more in its terms of its wave dynamics than in its physical geometry. And the transverse planes are one of those. And what happens is that, so there's 9 of them. Right? And so there's one midway in the pelvis here, one right at, and they feel kind of like diaphragms, right? And then one right at the top of the pelvis here, one right at the rib cage around your belly button here, one right where the diaphragm is, one right like under your clavicle, right above your lungs, at your throat here, right under your jaw here, one right through here, and then one right here. Right? And what it feels like clinically is that each one of them feels like this really still surface of water. Have you ever seen just glass water that's so still. And it feels right under it is just this little wave that wants to break through. But the surface tension, it's so still, it's such a glass surface that the surface tension is so great that it can't quite make it through. Right? And so what happens, we just put our hands there and just create a little bit of wave. And what that starts is this amazing flow that comes up through here. And again, I'm just experiencing this clinically, going, wow, that's really cool. And as it opens up, what feels like is happening is that the system is starting to come to peace with our polarities, our incongruence, you know? And, you know, it's interesting, often the incongruence that we notice first is in other people. They're not walking their talk. He says this and does that. The bigger things, once we heal that and become a little less judging of that, is coming to peace with our own incongruence. Because we all got them. We all do. It's what inspires us. It's what moves us forward. It's the recognition of that that allows us to move through it. It's part of our nature. As this come together, not only do our yin-yang, our male-female come together, but there comes to peace with and moving through that lack of congruence in our life. And some of it we move through, and some of it we just come to peace with. Yeah, and maybe change it later. Right? And so I'm talking to Donna. Wow, there's this cool thing that's opening up. And as it opens up, I can feel the breath come up and down, and it pumps, and it seems that these channels are just meeting and coming together. And then when it gets to the top, it feels like there's this huge energy surge through the body. And she's like, whoa, that sounds like the nadis. I'm like, thanks, Donna, you got a book on it? So she gives me one. I would be walking around in complete ignorance if it wasn't for her. And so, you know, the nadis have to do with the awakening of the kundalini, the male-female aspects. And so here's the deal. Because for me, it's simply noting something, this is the feel of it, and wow, it sounds a lot like that. I've said that in public, and there's been people that have come at me pretty strong saying, look, the kundalini's dangerous. You shouldn't be waking that up on people. And it's like, well, first off, I'm not awakening it in people. I'm noticing patterns, and when they show up in the person, to me, when a pattern shows up, it's the body saying, okay, I'm ready to do this. The kundalini is dangerous, just like any energy is dangerous on a system that cannot integrate it. When you expand your awareness way beyond your flexibility, you're going to fry the system. Years ago, when I was still wet behind the ears, within a few days, I had a couple new people, right? One of them worked at Argonne Labs, and it had been exposed to radiation. Another one had had a really intense kundalini experience. Guess what? Both of them had the same feel of fry in their system, right? It had that same zit, 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 and a lot of stuff to sort out. Energy is energy. You either integrate it or not. It can be the best energy in the world, but if you're not integrating, it doesn't matter, right? And so with this, it's not like we're seeking to awaken it. It's that the body's stepping into, wow, I'm ready to work with these energies, right? And what's kind of cool is that you'll see there's little arrows. There's actually a feel as you release them of the body coming down and then up. And as that starts to pump up and down through the system, that creates then this feel of this energy moving up through, and it extends back and forward. You want to goof around with it? Just for fun. Well, I mean, you know, it doesn't matter to me. Do you want to goof around with it or no? Sure. I mean, we're not going to awaken your kundalini. We're just going to give you a sense of, you know, woo! We're just going to give you a sense of the flow in the body. Okay? Cool. So a few things I wanted you to get in touch with. So the ones that point down is an inhale, and then it's an exhale for the ones that point up. And so you'll notice it's down, up, down, up, and then it's down, down, and then up. Okay? So it's going to be an inhale, and then an exhale, an inhale, and exhale at the diaphragm, inhale, and then exhale at the throat, and then it's a okay, and what you'll feel is this movement down and up. Now, as you do that, okay, and so there's this and then this. And so essentially, as you're inhaling, there's this movement, and then it comes up. And that's essentially getting a sense for that energy that moves back. And so it's inhale, exhale, and it's kind of complex. Try to keep up, right? Right? So is that, and I mean, don't get heady about it. Just feel your hands go back and forth like this. So we're just going to have some fun. Cool? And then the other thing that's kind of fun is that the ones that point down also extend back and then here. And so essentially you get this kind of motion that comes back and then up and then back and then up and then back and then ultimately up. And so it's all of this, it not only brings this together, but ultimately it lifts us to be pointing toward the infinite. Cool? Okay, ready? And by the end of this, you'll also be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You'll be so coordinated, okay? And so first thing is we're just going to breathe through it. And so if you, that again, the picture's right here. There's one there, on up. And so with this one, taking that breath in, and then top of the pelvis out, and then around your belly button in, diaphragm out, at the top of the shoulders in, and the throat out, and the base of your jaw in, roof of your mouth in, and then when it gets about midway on your head, out. And so now we're going to repeat that with, as we in, our body bends back, and then out comes up, and that's in, and then out at that diaphragm, and then in, and then out at the throat, and then in, ultimately lifting up and out. And now again going back down with the hands in, and we're going to get a flow out. And then in, out, in, out, in, out, and in, out. And then what you'll notice, if you continue with that, you'll just get more of a flow where you'll feel your arms go back and forth, where it's in, out, in, out, in, out. You'll start to feel the flow back and forth in your system. In, out. If you goof around with it and get the coordination, you really start to get a little dizzy and feel a little spirals. It's kind of fun. You know, for those of us who don't drink, we've got to, figure out other things to do. Cool?
Yes.
And here's what's amazing, because, I've done, a lot of stuff over the years, breath work and this and that and blah, blah, blah. It's extraordinary to feel it awaken from the inside. When you feel the flows go on, when you feel your body go into movement, and it's all generated and inspired from inside. And a lot of the breath work that's out there, a lot of the different modalities and exercises that are there actually came from noticing what people did naturally in those expanded states of consciousness. And then there's the thought that, well, if we then have exercises to do that, then we'll get there. And here's what I have to say. You'll get there if your system can integrate it. If it can't integrate it, it just doesn't matter. And so you find yourself needing to do it all the time just to be there. What if that was just our natural state? Going further into freaky land? Okay, and so this is, again, I'm just reporting what I see. Laying it all out for you. There comes a point, and that those transverse planes are the first step, where the body then, it's all about the flow. The geometry just starts to fade into the background. And what you see more is the energetic flow of the system. One of the things that shows up is that you become very aware that those little energy grids going out is called the torus flow. And we mentioned there's this flow that comes up the back, down the front, and then these spirals awaken, and then this through seemingly the nadis. Well, what you see start to happen then is that this huge torus flow, this field around the body, simply starts to awaken. You usually see it through the core of the body first, and then what's fascinating that happens is that you'll actually see different parts of the body want to tap in and connect with that. Usually the first one, guess what? Here. If you're familiar with the heart math program, they talk very much about in that loving heart space, that torus flow. Well, you actually see that awaken in the body. They say that the heart is the little brain, right? And so first the brain, the spinal cord, wake into that. And then the heart, which is the little brain, starts to go into that same rhythm. Then the next one, guess what? Is our reproductive, which is the little heart. Those creative centers, you'll see it. Then you start to see through the different organs, through each vertebra, that same flow. The body starts to get and tap into that, becoming more energy than matter. The matter realizing that, oh my gosh, energy isn't flowing through me, it actually is me. Real quickly, then the next thing, one of the next things you see, shoop, is that instead of this defined geometry, you start to actually, instead of seeing the physical borders of the body, the energetic grid. I'm almost done, no worries, right? You start to see the energetic grid where the lines of the body simply start to blur, and the system truly taps with into its energetic nature. It starts to shift and change. And they say that what exists truly is the fabric of the cosmos. And what creates our physical reality is where there's a wrinkle in that fabric, right? Well, what happens, you'll see this wrinkle in the grid, the energetic grid. It's like if you can imagine, instead of seeing the person's actual body, you just see like a web work that's them. And you'll see these kinks in it. You tap in and put your finger where that kink is, and it's like somebody shakes out that fabric, and it just reforms to something else. The person's physiology just shifts. Cool stuff. How many patterns shifting, who knows, but their wrinkles are changing, right? Here's another, and I can't believe I'm telling you all this stuff, right? Because, I'm crazy, so there you go. Anyway, genius insanity, it's a really fine line. I think I'm toward the insanity side, but anyway. The next thing you see is that, again, the body is just in this state of flow. Looking for patterns, palpating through the system, geometry's not there, grid's not there. Essentially what feels like is along the sides, it's usually the sides of the body here, like this little door that opens, whoomp, 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 right? If you try and force your way in, it's going to close. Because what it requires is complete and total surrender. Because what's going to happen as the practitioner, whoomp, whoomp, it almost feels like if you're worthy, as you pass your hand over, it grabs you, takes you through this wormhole, throws you out at the other end. Woo! What a ride. The person on the table's like, whew. Bazillions of things change in a moment. The sense that I've gotten, God, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. The sense that I've gotten, and just from what people have said, I believe in concurrent realities. According to quantum physics, whenever you make a choice, there's a bifurcation point. And some other you and some other reality made a different choice. There's an infinite number of yous playing an infinite number of lives right here, right now. Right? The feel of the wormhole is that the system makes a choice to tap into one of those lives and pull information from it to integrate here. Just from what people have said, from what their experiences are. And I mean, truly, physiology shifts like that. It's a moment of complete surrender. There was one time where, just for fun, I didn't even come with any direction. I simply posed the question in my mind, can we go to a particular reality? Shut me out like that. As soon as I pose any question at all, it says, unless you're willing to just be a witness, because in this whole thing, guess who leads the dance? You know, people have said, oh, Sue, you're such a great chiropractor. I'm just good at doing what I'm told. Ask my mom. I was a good kid. Because their system leads the dance. This is one of those moments when the body reaches a place of clarity. And does this kind of stuff happen every day? No. That door of possibility opens and says, take a look at what's possible. And now guess what? You got to walk the path to get there. After wormholes, and again, I've had this experience at seminars, we're a field. Our energy is our essence. There comes a point where there's no flow, there's just isness, there's just pure vibration. It feels as if, as a practitioner, you completely dissolve, the person your hands are on dissolves. In that peace, everything just shifts and then recoalesces into a different reality. No fuss, no muss, no work, changes. The step beyond that, we've talked about. That point. That point where from that place, infinity is awakened. This is the possibility I see. When I committed to a path of releasing the interference to the infinite potential within each being. I wasn't joking. I wasn't kidding around. I get bored easily. I'm not going to devote myself to something that I can't be passionate about. And, you know, no disrespect, but getting rid of somebody's pain, if that's all you want, here's a fifth of gin. Because it'll do it. Is that what you really want, though? Or do you want more? This is the possibility that I see. These are the glimpses clinically that happen. The thing is walking the path. Are we going to get here within my lifetime? I don't know. I'm hoping. I know we're about here on the curve. I know the more that we experientially connect with our geometry and become conscious of how sacred we are and how perfect our design is, and have that love for our beingness and respect for the wonder that we are, I know that we take little steps along the way. I choose to believe that incredible things are possible in our life way beyond what we've ever dreamed. It's just a matter of tapping in and do you want to play? That's all there is to it. thanks for coming, guys. I